It's the sound of ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Rick Jackson. Thank you for spending some of your Monday with us. When the weather warms up, we here in northern Ohio head to the shores of Lake Erie. It is, of course, our greatest natural resource and asset. We recreate there, we escape, we enjoy the winter months. But that warming weather signals a troubling trend, which has been getting worse and worse each year, and that's toxic algal blooms across the lake. Blooms occur because of the nutrient-rich runoff from farming across the region heading into the lake, feeding cyanobacteria, that's blue-green algae for the layperson. They occur most severely in the shallower waters on the western portion of the lake near Toledo, creeping towards Sandusky. Simply put, the blooms are a problem. They poison the water, they kill the fish, they ruin the area of the lake economically. Back in 2014, we all recall the blooms contaminated the city of Toledo's drinking water. City did not have potable drinking water for 3 days. Now, these blooms are the subject of a new documentary. It's called The ERIE Situation. Featured at this year's Cleveland International Film Festival, the winner of the global health competition. For the rest of the hour, we're going to discuss the film and the blooms that occur every year. To do that, I want to welcome to the Sound of Ideas, director of The ERIE Situation, David Ruck. David, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. To join the conversation, folks, 216-578-0903. You can tweet us at Sound of Ideas, text us 216-916-6478, or the always comfortable email, soi@ideastream.org. David, I know you spent some time with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, but how did you get involved in the subject initially, then choose to address the algal blooms in the form of a documentary?
Great question. Yeah, actually, I was working on a project for Ocean Conservancy. They were looking for stories to tell about NOAA's activities in the Great Lakes, and we settled on telling the story of these buoy assets that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has out in the Great Lakes to measure all sorts of environmental parameters. And actually, we focused on a story in Cleveland, which dealt with hypoxic water, which is, I didn't really realize this going into the story, but found out that hypoxic water that ends up in Cleveland is really a result of these algal blooms that die and migrate towards the east from the Toledo region to Cleveland. And so after we were done telling that story, a friend of mine, Ed Verhamy at Limnotech and now Freeboard Technologies, he and I were going back and forth talking about the algae blooms and what that was, what that looked like, some of the drivers for algal blooms in Western Lake Erie, and decided I wanted to take a deep dive into telling that story.
And the film turned out to be an awesome education as well. Offer a brief explanation, and without a semester of biology, as Professor Dick offered in the film there, cyanobacteria, what it is, maybe how we're seeing differences in the bloom from, as you just said, Toledo and Cleveland have very different problems. Neither is the normal lake ecosystem. Yeah.
Well, for very detailed questions, I'd probably direct you to Greg Dick at the University of Michigan, who can tell you about these things at the molecular DNA level. But generally speaking, cyanobacteria is one of the oldest organisms on the planet. It's what gave us oxygen-producing photosynthesis, and for millennia, it was probably the dominant species or one of the dominant species on the planet. Anything that photosynthesizes and produces oxygen, somewhere in its code, its DNA somewhere, it got that from cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria is the reason we're able to live and breathe the air, and the process that it invented. But when it when you feed it too much, it can grow out of control, and that's sort of what you're seeing year after year in Western Lake Erie and waterways all over the world, really.
You start the film on Point Place, Ohio. For those who aren't aware, Point Place, small waterfront community in Lucas County, but outside Toledo. The town's economy, its identity, its love of water, very evident there. Why'd you choose Point Place to start the film?
Well, actually, this is a great story because one of the first things I did when we started this project was, we early on in the production process, we're out there taking photographs and video of the bloom, and I was posting them on social media, some of them, and I started getting messages from some people online sending me videos that they'd taken on their cell phones of sailing through these algae blooms. And eventually I responded back And it was a guy by the name of Ken Sabin who, grew up in that area and was a boat builder and spent, countless hours out on the water. And, invited me out to Point Place to what he thought I was going to do was tell everyone there that he gathered this group, and he thought I was going to give everybody an explanation of why they had this problem. I was like, no, we're actually here to see if you want to be included in this film and tell your story. As it turns out, Point Place has got the Ottawa River on one side and the Maumee River on the other side. And so you have basically this peninsula, going out into Lake Erie. And so when you get these prolific algal blooms, and if the wind is right, coming out of the east, it pushes them back into that area, up into the Ottawa, up into the Maumee, and basically surrounds and inundates this community with algae blooms. And that it could be a toxic algae bloom. So looking at the post 2014 water crisis, we can have a lot of confidence that the water treatment plant, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about this, is prepared to and can treat the water. Great. So you can trust what's coming out of your tap. But what does that do for people like the folks in Point Place who live next to it, who rely on it, who breathe the air that, hovers around it? Mm-hmm. So that's why Point Place really seemed to me, I was really captivated by the people I met there. They're just good people and great to be around. They love the water. And it seemed like their story was one that wasn't really being told yet. And it just made sense that from the conversations we were having that this was something we were going to include in the film.
Right. Not that there weren't other towns on Lake Erie particularly hard hit, but that one certainly made a good focal point. I'm struck by the one lady who ran a fish cutting place, and she said in a good year we make $30,000 to $50,000. Last year we made $500,000. That's stunning.
Yeah, that's what they walk away with. So I mean that right there is a very plain, clear example of the economic impact these kinds of things are happening on communities that rely on Lake Erie for income.
You spend a lot of time talking not just about the blooms resulting in dead fish, but the health effects of this overabundance of algae on human beings. Your boat builder described coming out of the water as having a film on him that he felt like he needed to remove immediately. Were you surprised at how much impact there was on a human?
Well, we went with Ken Sabin to the University of Toledo Medical Center, where we interacted with Dr. David Kennedy and his team, who are studying the effects of harmful algal blooms on mainly folks with pre-existing conditions, and creating diagnostic testing to determine someone's exposure. So I think that, when I talk about this, I tend to talk about what a lot of people can relate to, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw tons of money immediately go into research to fund an understanding of what this was doing to people and what we could do to address it. And we very quickly had vaccines to respond to this global problem. Cyanobacterial blooms and the problems that they cause are fairly localized. So we don't see the funding there that's needed to have a full grasp of the impacts on human beings yet, or what to do if somebody is exposed to a certain level. So that's the thing. It's like, we know that you can trust the water coming out of the tap in a place like Toledo now, because they've spent $500 million turning their plant into a world-class, state-of-the-art water treatment plant. But what if you spend a lot of time out on the water? What if you're breathing the air around it? And there's research now that shows that these things can become aerosolized. You can breathe them. And basically, all of the medical research that's emerging now that I'm seeing is basically saying, the symptoms that this guy, Ken and the folks in his community are experiencing, those sound a heck of a lot like something you might get from a harmful algal bloom. So I think that there's work to do. There's research that still needs to be done on identifying these impacts, having people in the community recognize that what they're feeling may be a result of having been around a harmful algal bloom. But then, some other even more basic things. There's footage in the film where you see folks swimming in this green water near Monroe, Michigan. And from having been there, I know there's signs on that beach that warn you about what that water might be, what might be in it. So I don't know what we can do about folks that don't seem to read the sign, but just really understanding that these things can have an impact, and learning more about how widespread it can be in the community, especially on a more acute level during the summer months when the blooms are so bad.
And David, for folks who didn't see the film, you're talking runny nose, eye irritation, trouble breathing, rashes. And I too was struck by the drone shots looking down at people swimming.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks for itself.
It does.
Multiple levels.
So you mentioned the Toledo situation, 2014, the drinking water, and you mentioned that they spent this money to have a water treatment plant that's now state of the art. They know, and we can all learn from, what to look for now that they weren't looking for before, so they can see the season coming, essentially?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that's been done. It's a priority for National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and their partners to model and predict harmful, the bloom every year. And you've got information coming from Heidelberg University, combined with weather data, combined with things that emerge throughout the season. So like it's constantly being updated. But yeah, they basically can model now based off of the amount of phosphorus that's coming into the lake. They can kind of give you a fairly accurate prediction of what we're likely to see. And that usually comes around early July. And sometimes within a week or two of that prediction is when blooms typically start.
Well,
so
let's move on
good at it.
To the causes there, because we do know that it's coming. And you introduced the really interesting situation of the cause being agriculture. The mayor of Toledo points very stringently at the farmers in Ohio. You feature several farmers in the film who are also producers, and they're stuck in an unfortunate situation. Certainly the smaller farmers, they say we have to do this to compete. We realize what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So farming, the family farmer is quickly becoming a figment of the past as the pressures to continue to grow larger, grow more per acre, are on them to make ends meet, and their margins are super thin, and it's just becoming harder and harder for the average farmer to have any income, let alone a sustainable income in this industry, and we're seeing the effects of that in terms of farmer suicide. It's suicide is one of the highest. I mean, farming has one of the highest rates of suicide of any profession.
It does, yeah. It
may even be the highest right now. I used to think it was dentists, but apparently it's farming. So I think that one of the points that I hope gets across, at least in the conversations that follow the film, is that the average farmer is not the person to blame for what's going on in lakes, rivers, and streams, and namely Lake Erie. It is the system that they're basically forced to exist in, where they don't get to dictate the price of the product that they're growing. It's very difficult for them to even pick the product that they're growing. Mm-hmm. The system is set up so that they feed product into these large, giant corporations who make those decisions for them. And that's just becoming a harder and harder system for the average, if they're even average anymore, because there's so few of them, farmer to work in and have a sustainable income. Right. So that's one of the things that I hope people understand, is that farmers are creative. They're engineers in their own right. If they have a problem, they can typically solve it, but they need the resources to solve it. Right. And unfortunately, right now, the resources are going more towards ensuring that the status quo remains rather than actually growing our food in a sustainable way, in a way that allows farmers to thrive in the arena that they love, and while hopefully taking care of our lakes, rivers, and streams. We're not seeing that.
Yeah. Two sidebars to that, David. One, we did actually do a program on the increase in farmer suicide last year. Justin Glanville hosted it, and folks, will put a link to that show on today's show page if you'd like to hear more about that. Secondly, it's not just what people are growing on their farms. And to that point, Shirley from Cleveland's been on the phone for a while listening. You wanted to bring up concentrated animal feeding operations. Shirley, is that the case?
Yes. We euphemistically call the problem nutrient-rich farm runoff. I mean, it sounds great, nutrient-rich, like it's something in your cereal. What we're talking about is tons and tons of manure from these concentrated animal feeding facilities in the Western Basin primarily. And it's from increased meat and dairy consumption, and they don't internalize that manure. They spread it all over the place, these confined animal facilities, including in the winter where it just runs off right into Lake Erie. So we need to call it what it is, tons and tons of manure. And everyone has to take responsibility for meat and dairy consumption.
Thank you for that, Shirley. David, is that something that you want people who see the film to understand?
She's not alone in feeling that, and she's absolutely correct. And so, what we call a concentrated animal feeding operation in the state of Ohio, it's 700 cows, 2,500 pigs, 1.25 million chickens, and if that's your size, then you're identified in state records, and you have to have a manure management plan, a nutrient management plan. But if you fall just below that designation, then you skirt all of those regulations.
It's a loophole, right?
Yeah, and
Right.
so there's way more of those in the watershed than there are these actual permitted concentrated animal feedlot operations.
Okay. Running short on time, David, got about 30 seconds. Tell us where we can see it now. Cleveland International Film Festival streams ended last night, but you're coming to more festivals?
Yeah, we're going to be at the Detroit Freep Film Festival, April 30 and May 1st. We've got a huge screening that's being put together at the Michigan Theater in Ann Arbor on that is May 23. We've got another screening June 12th in Maumee, Ohio. We're going to be at the University of Toledo. We're going to be all over the place.
Okay, good options. David Ruck, director of the ERIE Situation. Thank you so much for the talk today. Continued good luck with the film.
Thank you so much for having me.